The first few days succeeding my introduction to these scientists were a chaotic blur of meetings and debate between differing departments of academia. All of them, it seemed, wanted to obtain for themselves the largest slice of my time. Discussions on which research wing would benefit most from my experience raged on, seemingly without end. I, of course, understood this debate. After all, if a hyper-advanced alien had landed on Earth, I'd have wanted to learn from them too. That being said, for many of the fields in question, my computer's STEM database seemed like the far superior tool for learning than I myself was. Allocating the time for its usage was yet another source of discourse. Eventually, it was decided that access to my ship, and, by extension, its technologies, would be rotated between research heads, with only two at a time allowed inside barring extraneous circumstance. Similarly, my usual day would be divided amongst the individual departments. Awakening the next morning in my cell and rolling from its surprisingly comfortable bed with a groan, I quickly stood myself up and in the bathroom began preparing myself for the day to come. A brief glance at the Koffel time clock mounted above my television revealed that I had only about 1/10 of a segment, 15 minutes, before my escorts and translator would arrive. No time for a bath, I concluded to myself. There were many things I liked about the natives of this planet, but their lack of showers was not one of them. Awkwardly smoothing a palmful of water through my messy hair and straightening my lab coat, I nodded to myself in the mirror before marching myself into the kitchen and retrieving a sorka fruit. Imagine a sour blueberry the size of your fist for breakfast. No sooner had I concluded washing off in the sink the sticky remnants of my morning meal than a knock sounded at my door. My captors turned colleagues had graciously decided to disable the cell's lock, allowing me to open it and roam the facilities as I pleased. Even so, I was surprised by the respect with which they regarded my privacy. Most humans I knew would have foregone knocking entirely and simply barged in. And so, concluding my final morning self-collections, I stepped toward the door and opened it.
Hello, Andrew.
Chirped Ambassador Chott, holding in his claws a box labeled in their increasingly less foreign language.
Our research wing is very excited to have your support. They worked together to design this for you.
Beside him, Vavi preened herself.
I did the English words.
She began proudly as my translator sliced open the container with his claw and handed it to me. Reaching inside and wrapping my fingers around the box's contents, I lifted my palm once more and brought up to the light this strange amulet which I had just been given. Its polished silver surface, which fit comfortably into my palm, hosted a handful of alien words, followed by an inscribed depiction of my ship. Below that, an English translation read, "Andrew of Humanity, representative from planet Earth. Don't try buttering me up with flattery, it works too well." At that, Chott's throat clicked with amusement, whilst beside him, my friend quietly began to translate what I had said.
So you like it?
Vavi asked, shyly smoothing out her arm feathers as she anxiously awaited my reply. "Love it." I smiled, centering the necklace against my chest with the intent of keeping it on display against my coat's stark white background. "So where to first?"
Glad you asked.
Chott began, gesturing for myself and Vavi to follow as he took off at a brisk pace down the hall.
Our computer boys are still busy in Lab 3, picking at your laptop, while the medical scientists are likewise in your ship analyzing its medbay. Right now, it seems your presence is most needed in the aerospace and weapons engineering departments.
Offering up in reply a silent nod of compliance, I continued following Chott through the hallways alongside Vavi until eventually we arrived at the hall's end, where a bonded pair of metal doors mutually plastered with various warning signs awaited us. Sounds of Koffel chatter and whirring machinery echoed out from the other side. Then I opened the door, and everything fell silent. Below the entrance platform where I stood, a dozen or so engineers who had previously been milling about on their assigned tasks had all stopped what they were doing to glimpse the alien in their midst. Meanwhile, across the floor from my entryway, a sterile white door flung to reveal behind it the department head's vaguely familiar form, plump and speckle-feathered like a starling.
Good to see you again, Mr. Andrew.
He called out to me excitedly.
Me and my crew wanted to welcome you with something special. In fact, just now I finished making the final plucks.
Mounted on the wall beside my entryway was a storage shelf for goggles. Vavi wasted no time in retrieving 3 pairs and handing one off to me. The glass goggles clearly weren't designed with a human in mind, which resulted in much awkwardness as I labored to apply them. Eventually, however, I was able to achieve with them something resembling a fit, and upon doing so began to make my way down a nearby metal stairway and onto the main floor, Chot and Vavi in tow. Approaching from across the floor, the engineering director, and that white door from which he had arrived, I quickly began looking over my new contemporaries. Most of them I recognized from my initial introduction, but a select few were noticeably unfamiliar. All of them, however, were absolutely fixated upon me, each one still reeling, I imagined, from the novelty of an extraterrestrial walking among them. All except for one. Passing by the final worker on my route to join the department head, I noticed in them a distinct lack of attention to my presence as they pored over a stack of blueprints. And when this figure finally did look up at me, I could swear they did so with a glare. Not wanting, however, to make a scene mere steps away from the director, I instead elected to simply ignore them. For now, at least.
I never seeing a lab this nice. They really preen their feathers for you.
Whispered Vavi into my ear in flawed but functional English, just as the 3 of us concluded our approach, whereupon both herself and Chot respectfully prostrated themselves before the somewhat rotund man in charge, who responded in kind. My attempt to replicate this gesture, awkward as it may have been, appeared more than satisfactory.
Now then, Ek,
Chot began, speaking to the director in Zintrish, and in doing so indirectly forcing Vavi to translate for me.
I hope whatever special thing you have for Andrew isn't dangerous in any way. We don't exactly have spare human lying around.
The notion of his work causing me harm prompted from the engineering head an almost offended gasp.
I would never endanger such important guest, Chot.
He squawked furiously.
I assure you, prototype is completely safe.
Such mention of a prototype quickly caught my scientific attention. Whatever the build was, it would most certainly provide me better insight into Zintral's current military technology. Not to mention, allowing me to provide immediate feedback on what exactly is this prototype? I asked curiously, casting aside the doubts of my translator, who reluctantly relayed the question to Ek.
The Rikasi Carnivore M1 is our most advanced rifle prototype yet.
He boasted, puffing out with pride his sizable stomach.
It's entirely self-loading and can fire up to 4 rounds before needing a reload.
The emphasis placed upon self-loading, and Chot's subsequent impressed nod implied a degree of novelty that almost made me feel bad. It was clear that they worked hard on this, yet by human metrics, such a thing was downright archaic. Still, even with my ineptitude regarding the subject of guns, the idea of being the first human to use an alien firearm was simply too good a proposition to surrender. I'd love to test it out. If nothing else, it'll at least tell me where you guys are and where I should work towards getting you.
I suppose you're right, Andrew.
Chot conceded reluctantly, glancing about erratically, before finally easing upon the sight of a nearby first aid kit.
It only makes sense for you to see what Kafel engineering is and get sense for it before rocketing us into the future of warfare.
Accepting without hesitation the ambassador's surrender, Ek hurriedly shepherded the 3 of us inside to reveal there a firing range. Set up on the opposite end from us was what appeared to be some sort of Kafel shooting dummy, a collection of presumably modeled bones encased within a gelatinous substance, along with several balloons I assumed were meant to simulate organs. Meanwhile, on our end of the range, perched atop a secure-looking metal briefcase was the gun itself. Superficially, it resembled in its characteristics a classical human-made rifle from our world wars. However, where human rifles held a traditional ammunition chamber, this Rikasi carnivore had something more reminiscent of a revolver's cylinder, but larger and with only 4 slots for bullets instead of 6. If nothing else, it an aesthetically pleasing weapon. However, the real measure of a weapon isn't how good it looks when firing, but how bad its target will afterward. And that was what I was about to test.
Is she not a beauty?
The engineering director chirped proudly, picking up the gun, and for several minutes checking over its mechanisms before finally handing the weapon to me.
Have a shot with her and see how she compares to the ones from Earth.
Much as I admired his enthusiasm, frankly, I had my doubts such a weapon would compare at all to those of my era, let alone whatever the hell humanity had developed in my absence. Nevertheless, I dutifully accepted X's instructions as he pointed my shoulders toward the target, and watching me line up the shot gave an affirmative coup.
Be careful about that recoil, though. It's a bit heavy if you're not prepared.
And so, inhaling a deep breath, making some minor aim adjustments, and remembering the brief time spent with my grandfather's BB gun back at his cabin in Michigan, I stilled the shot and fired. On the first shot, nothing happened, save for the brief clink of a bullet hitting the metal wall behind my target. I had missed. Results from the second and third were similar. Then, however, with my confidence sufficiently dented, I steadied my aim once more and let one fly. Results from my shot were presented immediately in the form of plastic bones turning to shrapnel inside the dummy, rippling through several of the organs to release differing colors of liquid. For something meant to imitate death, it was a strangely beautiful display.
For a scientist, you sure shoot well.
Vavi was the first of my observers to offer up a reaction.
Indeed.
Ek nodded, accepting the gun from me and promptly returning it to a safety setting previously unknown to me.
Let's get up close and take a nice look at your work.
He continued, pressing a button to bring down a metal shutter over the firing counter, before then producing a key and leading us through yet another door positioned beside it. Upon closer inspection, my imaginary opponent would have been absolutely dead. Half of the balloons had been ruptured by my bullet-transmuting bone into buckshot. My performance, however lackluster, had evidently impressed Vavi. Either that, or she was sucking up something fierce. Chot, on the other hand, was simply amused. I hadn't been sure of it before, but by this point I was relatively confident that he had some sort of military background. Casually strolling about the room, Ek began the process of picking up my missed shots, still trying to make small talk all the way.
Sorry about that kickback. We were still trying to correct recoil when your spaceship came in.
It's fine. I smiled awkwardly, rubbing my shoulder in search of the promised pain. However, regardless of where I poked, the kick just wasn't there. Speaking of things which were not there, I wasn't exactly sure where my shot had hit. There was no hole indicating an entrance point, and all that murky liquid slowly diffusing through the mock torso made locating the projectile itself near impossible. Finally collecting the third missed bullet, X stood up straight and began to approach me. However, to my surprise, he stopped short and once again kneeled down like he had to collect my projectiles.
Ah, there it is.
He squawked, holding up the metallic orb sized like a small bead.
This is the one that hit. You should keep it. They say your first crack is lucky.
Thanks. I murmured in confusion, accepting the bullet from him and balancing it into my palm. Is this a BB?
Thank you for watching. Like, share and subscribe for more original content. New chapters and standalone stories uploaded weekly.